Okay, welcome back to math class and welcome to chapter 10. Today we're talking about squares and square roots. Just in case you are unfamiliar, a square is when we raise something to an exponent of 2. So if I said 4 squared, that's going to be 4 to the second power, or 4 times 4. That's 4 squared. Any number times itself is 4, is a number squared. You're already really familiar with exponents from chapter 9. What we're learning today is square roots, which is basically doing the square backwards. So here, 4 squared is 4 times 4, which equals 16, right? Now if I take the square root of 16, I'm undoing the square operation. And we do that with something called a radical. It looks like this. It's like a division symbol that has a little tail. It's called a square root. And what I'm saying is find the factors of 16 that are equal. So the square root of 16 equals 4, the opposite of squaring. 4 squared is 16. The square root of 16 is 4. Hopefully that's making sense. One thing that's really important with square roots is you see 4 times 4 is 16. So is negative 4 times negative 4, right? Because 2 negatives equal a positive. So the square root of 16 could equal 4 or negative 4. And we write that like this. The square root of 16 equals plus or minus 4. Positive or negative 4. Because we don't know if I multiplied positive 4 times positive 4 to get 16, or if I multiplied negative 4 times negative 4. Either way, I get positive 16, so the square root of 16 can either be 4 or negative 4. Instead of writing it all out, we just put plus or minus 4. Now, one thing that's important to note, because it can never be negative. It's always going to be positive when we square something. That means we can't find the square root of a negative number. If I said find the square root of negative 25, we can't do it. There's not two numbers. There's not a number that when multiplied by itself, it'll give me a negative value. It's always going to be positive. So if you see a problem where the negative sign is under the radical, then what you're going to write is you're going to write no real solution. Because there's no number that when multiplied by itself will give you a negative 25. Something that we can do is if the negative sign is on the outside of the square root, like this, then I'm going to take the square root of 25, which is going to be 5, and I'm going to multiply that by our negative sign and get negative 5 as my answer. So if you see the negative on the outside of the radical, I want you to think in your head that's like multiplying the radical by negative 1. But if you see the negative sign on the inside of the radical, there is no real solution. We can't find the square root of a negative number. Now, a number that you can find the square root of, and it's just a whole number, we call those perfect squares. So 16 is a perfect square, 25 was a perfect square, 4 is a perfect square because 4 equals 2 times 2. There's lots of perfect squares that you know. 9 is a perfect square because it equals 3 times 3. and so on. Any number that you can split up into a whole number that I could take the square root of, like the square root of 36 is 6, that's going to be a perfect square. But you may run into some numbers that aren't perfect squares, and when that happens, say you had the square root of 75. When that happens, what I want you to do is put it into your calculator. You'll see in your calculator, it will have a button that looks like a radical, like this. When you click that button, it'll give you your radical and some parentheses, and you'll type in the number 75 and hit enter. And this will give you an estimate number with a bunch of decimal points. You just round that to the nearest tenth, and that'll be your answer. And that's only with ones that aren't perfect squares. Hopefully you'll be able to remember a lot of your perfect squares from memorizing your multiplication tables. But otherwise, you're allowed to put it in your calculator. And your homework will have them separated, ones that are perfect squares and ones that you can practice putting in your calculator.